Hello again. It is undeniably the case that black people in both Britain and the United States tend to be poorer, more likely to be unemployed, and less likely to have a high level of academic attainment than the average white person. The traditional explanation advanced for this is that black children get a raw deal both at school and in the job market, and that racial prejudice alone is sufficient to account for any observed differences in outcomes between the two groups. Some people have suggested that a difference in IQ levels might play a role, although the evidence for this is not wholly convincing. It may well be that a combination of factors are at play and that one needs to look at these together to see what is going on. The first thing to remember is that black children reach their gross motor milestones on average earlier than white children. In plain language, this means that they will stand, walk, jump and run before white children. This is cross-cultural. It's the same with a baby on a Caribbean farm or in the African rainforest, the same in New York as it is in London. I give a reference for this research on this in the description to this video. The second factor which might have a bearing on the matter is that young black men have, from puberty, higher levels of testosterone circulating than do white youths. About 15% higher, in fact. Again, I give a reference for this above. There are two things to note about this. The first is that this extra hormone can come in handy during competitive sports. Top athletes, footballers and boxers usually have more free testosterone than average, but there can be disadvantages as well. It might make teenagers and young men fidgety, a little more prone to aggression, for example. Neither of these things are desirable in the average school. Then, too, there is a matter of deferring gratification and controlling impulsive behaviour, at which I looked recently in another video. There is reason to suppose that black pupils are less able to restrain their impulses than white ones. We're talking on average, obviously. And there's controversy about this idea in any case. Even a slightly reduced ability to remain seated and attentive in class without interrupting the teacher or distracting other students could provide at least a partial explanation for the fact that black students are far more likely than white ones to be excluded from the classroom or school, which certainly harms their educational prospects. Thinking now of deferred gratification, this is really crucial to academic achievement, especially in the teenage years and early 20s. One must have sufficient maturity to see the point in remaining at school and studying in the evenings while your friends are out playing in the streets. If you are unable to exercise the self-control and foresight necessary to remain in full-time education until at least the age of 21, then one's long-term prospects are very likely to be harmed. There are several other factors which may play a role in this process, but even limiting ourselves to those at which we have looked, it's not hard to sketch out an hypothesis which might account for most of the unfavourable life outcomes, I should say, which have been observed to adversely affect black people disproportionately. Let's try and think about what might happen. If a child is running about and jumping earlier than the others in his nursery, then he or she is likely to get better at this sort of physical activity than the others. This might go some way towards showing why so many sports are dominated by black people. We know too that puberty strikes black boys about a year earlier than it does those who are white. The average age for African American boys to reach puberty is now 9, which is a lot earlier than it was a century ago. I give a reference for this above. It is entirely possible that the early gross motor movements could combine with the earlier onset of puberty and result in boys who are less inclined or able to sit still in class. If this was combined with a slightly reduced ability to restrain impulsive behaviour, then those things alone could probably show us why there is so much conflict between restless black boys and teachers who are trying to impose discipline on the class. We've not needed to bring either racism or IQ into the discussion, and what we all already know, perhaps reinforced by a disinclination to defer rewards, could end up in a greater proportion of black youths leaving school or being excluded from it. The educational disadvantages resultant from all this would also give us a clue about why black people tend to have lower paid jobs, less well qualified and more likely to be unemployed. The good news is that something could actually be done about all this. Perhaps allowing children longer breaks or more physical activity would make it more likely that they would settle down to their lessons. Or perhaps a 10-minute break every hour for exercises with the whole class taking part might be helpful to get rid of some of that jitteriness or excess energy. I have no certain answer here, but I'm rather musing out loud. It is, I think, time to start trying other options to address these problems instead of just relying